The pressure on Nicolas Maduro's regime has entered a very complex and coordinated phase. Washington has intensified its operations in the Caribbean under the pretext of combating drug trafficking. Some say that, deep down, a symbolic political strategy seems to be consolidating, also to keep Maduro cornered, without international legitimacy due to fraudulent elections or election results, and with increasingly limited room for maneuver. In this context, the figure of Maria Corina Machado, with international recognition and political support from democratic sectors, adds a narrative of inevitable transition, she says, reinforcing the idea that Maduro's time is running out. Let's open the debate at an angle. Welcome. At the same time, banners have appeared in universities and on the streets of Venezuela with a phrase that Maria Corina Machado launched a week ago, which has been appropriated by the citizenry. What's happening, so to speak, is that this message has been seen, accompanied by a drawing of a battery with a 95% charge. And also the word freedom. With this, young university students are reiterating their support for the Venezuelan cause that has been led by the Nobel Peace Prize winner and confirming that they are preparing for what would be a political change, a definitive political change in Venezuela. I have no doubt that we are in a countdown. And in response to you, Patrick, I must confess that it has been a great challenge for me.
These are the forceful words of the winner of the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize. Venezuelan political leader Maria Corina Machado once again spoke of guarantees for the leader of the regime Nicolas Maduro if he leaves power peacefully, but she warned that his fall is imminent with or without negotiation. We have said that we are willing to offer guarantees that we will not make public until we sit down at
that negotiating table. What we are asking for is that those structures that have looted the country and that leave such a trail of death and pain be dismantled. And Maduro now has the possibility of moving forward with a peaceful transition. With the support of the international community and confident in her work for freedom, the political leader remains firm in her belief that regime change will be achieved with the help of the United States. She made this known to President Donald Trump last Friday. She wanted to let him know when Venezuela needs his leadership and that of the international coalition that has been formed. Patrick, what I have found is a general agreement among Venezuelans to recognize President Trump for what we consider fair and necessary. That is what I perceive to be the case in Venezuelan society, and that is the reason why I have done what I have done and said what I have said.
The words of the leader of Venezuela are known not only after being recognized with the Nobel Prize, but also after Washington's military deployment in the southern Caribbean in its fight against drug cartels, including the Cartel of the Suns, whose leader they say is Maduro, and for whom they are offering $50 million, began Phase 2. Furthermore, after President Donald Trump canceled diplomatic outreach to the Maduro regime, which he claims is a direct threat from the United States, an invasion, and which he is preparing to respond to.
Here is a reality. The one who declared war on Venezuelans was Nicolas Maduro. The one who applies state terrorism internally and narco-terrorism externally is Nicolas Maduro. The invasion that exists here is that of the Cubans, the Russians, the Iranians, Hezbollah, Jamas, the drug cartels, the Len guerrillas, and the FARC. That is the invasion that is taking place in Venezuela. Recognition for his tireless work in the defense and promotion of democratic rights ensures that he will fulfill his objective when the will of Venezuelans expressed at the ballot box is respected. I want to speculate about that. Everyone has a role to play, both civilians and military personnel, and in any case, any action that is respectful on July 28 would be the restoration of the constitution in Venezuela. The novel Maria Corina reinforces the hope of Venezuelans, who mostly hope that the political leader and U.S. pressure will bring about Maduro's fall. For me it was, well, the biggest surprise I've ever had in my life, and the truth is that I confess that even today, 3 days later, I'm still processing it. I think this recognition from the people of Venezuela has been an injection of energy and work. We
immediately put on the table the issue of forcing political change in Venezuela without direct intervention, but with sustained pressure. What happens if power in Venezuela continues to be a closed system, also supported by military intelligence structures and also some international alliances with Russia, Iran, and China? We're going to clear up these doubts right away with our panel today at an angle. It's a pleasure to greet and welcome Orlando Vieira Blanco, former Venezuelan ambassador to Canada and human rights lawyer to Australia. Thank you for being with us, Ambassador. Welcome to the international channel NTN 24.
Thank you very much and good morning here. Delighted to be with you.
Thank you. Also in the United States, I will greet Maria Isabel Puerta, an academic and member of the Network of Political Scientists. Thank you for being with us. Welcome. Thank you very much. It is
Also a pleasure to have Jose Vicente Carrasquero, Professor of Political Science at Miami Tate College, here on the panel. Thank you for being with us. Welcome. With great pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I will start with you, Ambassador Vieira. What do you think? How do you characterize what is happening? Some say that there is a strategy of international pressure as a means, a mechanism to politically weaken the regime of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. How do you see it? How do you view the actions of the United States, which has said it will have this frontal fight against drug trafficking and which refers to one of the leaders or members of this organization as the Cartel of the Suns, which, according to the United States, is coined by the Maduro regime? Well, the first thing we like to emphasize in the analysis is that we are witnessing something truly new, not only in Latin America, but in the world. There is an inevitable tendency to try to assimilate everything we are seeing to events like those that have occurred in the past, be it Panama, Libya, Haiti. And there are many examples of interventions and occupations. Here we are witnessing a very selective, very particular escalation, which has military but also police overtones, which leads to the saga of capture and not to the saga of a change of regime, as has been said, but simply to trying to end. A criminal state that has been penetrated by what they have called the cartel of the Solos. I have already said it, Mar Corina. A state that, internally practices state terrorism, which has neutralized the entire Venezuelan population with fear, persecution, and crimes against humanity, where the concept of sovereignty for them translates into the concept of repressive governance. And externally, it is now accompanied by all these operations that completely replace the concept, rather than replace it, simply review the concept of intervention, review the concept of sovereignty when the sovereignty or security of a state is affected, in this case of the continental United States, and when intervention means putting human rights before universal rights in a criminal state. In such a way that what needs to be analyzed here, and I would like the colleagues who are going to debate today to consider, is the sustainability of what is going to happen, because what is happening is indeed happening and the outcome is inevitable, although it is not imminent. We will talk about this later, but the sustainability of this entire operation is what is truly a challenge for Maria Corina. And I quickly anticipate that this sustainability, this leg of the table that we need, is the real compliance and obedience at the moment of the transition of the armed forces that have been, let's say, riddled with corruption and indoctrination.
Thank you for this first intervention, Maria Isabel Puerta. I give the floor to you. Well, the question is whether Maduro could resist indefinitely, as he thinks, without electoral legitimacy or external recognition. How do you see the situation so far? Well, I think that so far he has managed to survive the isolation and lack of legitimacy, precisely because of the alliances that have been consolidated, not only the most obvious ones, which are Russia and China, but also with other relevant actors that even move very well in the arena of Western democracies, such as Turkey. And they are allies not only because they are within the authoritarian axis, but also because they help Maduro avoid bypassing sanctions. On the one hand, that is important for Maduro and for his permanence in power and the consolidation of authoritarianism. However, I believe that what will determine whether he continues in power will be precisely the health and stability of the civil-military alliance of the Maduro regime. For example, it is not clear to me whether the transition will be from an authoritarian political regime to a transition from democracy to democracy, because that could happen, and that is what worries many of us from the perspective of U.S. military intervention, is the role of the military and whether they are willing to give up power. Maduro has said no. And obviously, the determining factor of that permanence that he says he is sure of, will depend almost exclusively on the military, and that is not very clear so far. We are, already, unclear about that point that Maria Isabel mentioned. I will give the floor to Jose Vicente. What impact do loyalties have, so to speak, within the military and political apparatus of Maduro?
Well, the first thing after greeting my fellow debaters is to highlight that if there is one thing that has a major influence on what is happening in Venezuela right now, it is uncertainty. An uncertainty that is spread out, the uncertainty of those who are waiting for something to happen and the uncertainty of those who are leading this event, an event that is undoubtedly causing certain internal reactions, not only within the leadership of Maduro, of the despotic regime that reigns in Venezuela today, but also in a civil society that is beginning to organize itself. As you said at the beginning, these signs that are appearing are happening and people are beginning to have the feeling that they can be good and supported, as we would say in Venezuela. So, this uncertainty is a fundamental factor that forces us to gradually incorporate variables into the analysis. One variable that I do not want to leave out is that in most of the polling stations where there were military personnel voting, Edmundo Gonzalez Rudio won. That means that we cannot consider that there is a solid loyalty to Nicolas Maduro among the military. Perhaps there is loyalty from a certain elite, as Chavez would call it at the time, a rotten elite of people who receive direct gifts that somehow force them to side with Maduro. But in any case, in that military structure that we see below, they have not been removed basically because they do not want to arm it. And that is another element that we have to add to this exercise. There is discontent, a discontent similar to that of another element that we have to add, which is the Venezuelan population, which is mostly against the Maduro regime. So that uncertainty, of course, leads to a lot of speculation, saying that there are times, that there are no times, that it will be immediate, that it will not be immediate, what comes next. The truth is that I believe that not even President Trump himself knows what is going to happen in what I have called a large-scale police operation. It is an operation that somehow puts America first, and forgive me for the redundant part. This must be seen as an operation to defend the American population by American law enforcement and military forces to protect the American people from this flood of drugs that was coming and is coming from the Caribbean. And seen that way, one begins to put variables in order, to identify the possibilities and to have a better idea of what may happen in the more or less immediate future. Now, yes, in a moment we are going to talk about this uncertainty that you mentioned. I want to give the floor back to Ambassador Vieira Blanco. Regarding what you were saying, sustainability, because some appropriate words are being thrown around at this roundtable discussion, with or without negotiation. Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Corina Machado said it. How do we explain it? Well,
I think it is appropriate to open the debate in the field of sustainability. What are the elements that could really try to, let's say, give permanence to a political transition in Venezuela? I agree with what one of our colleagues has said, that we cannot rule out scenarios in Venezuela where the transition is not necessarily a leap towards an ideal democracy as we long for. Here it is certainly a question of strength, it is a question of governability, of governance, and one of the elements, as I was saying, that are tied to what I have called the 4 pillars for achieving sustainability is precisely the reaction of Venezuelan society internally. I believe that the conditions are right, as José Vicente has already said, there is accumulated internal fatigue, not only of misery, famine, corruption, and anomie, there is also economic fatigue, there is moral fatigue, and ethical fatigue. This is the bath that the Nobel Prize came to give to authority, morality, and ethics. There is a desire to return to normality, and I believe that, when faced with a breaking point, Maduro's departure could reactivate and, let's say, generate an avalanche that seems silent at the moment, repressed, absent, or somehow has been smoothed out. It is what I have called the spring of the orchids in Venezuela, like the revolution of the third hair, I mean the Czech Revolution, or like the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, or like the Revolution of Mandela, where the social movement is reactivated and flourishes again as a result of the inspiration generated by the leadership of Maria Corina, this international recognition and this alliance from abroad. In such a way that people do feel that they have that support, and that is where the puzzle of sustainability begins to take shape. We could then go to a combination of events where those armed forces that are overwhelmed, it has happened before, but on this occasion the population is equally protected with a force superior to those armed forces that are the force from abroad. I'm not talking about an invasion, I'm simply talking about the threat that exists, and that many members of the armed forces are not going to risk themselves and not only their lives, but also many other aspects of fighting what appears to be a very uneven fight due to the U.S. decision to neutralize those who try to sabotage. Democracy. Now, there is a scenario of chaos, a scenario of a fragmented, weakened, fragile transition, which must be viewed with a very close eye.
Of course, a close eye, and I would like to immediately give the floor to Maria Isabel. What comments can you make about what Ambassador Vieira has said and to what extent? I would also like to ask her, can the opposition capitalize on this external pressure without losing autonomy or legitimacy internally? Yes, I believe that is key, and the award, the recognition of Machado, means not only recognition of his career and his democratic struggle, but also of the resilience and democratic will of Venezuelans. And that is why for the opposition this is an opportunity not only to regroup, but also to be able to define a common strategy. It seems to me that it is an enormous opportunity if the different tendencies and groups that are leaders in the democratic opposition take it that way. However, that will also depend on the risks they are willing to take, because unfortunately the issue of political violence, of persecution by the Maduro regime, is perhaps one of the factors that will most affect the ability of the opposition to regroup. But without a doubt I believe that with this recognition and perhaps with the same policy or military strategy of the Trump government, of the Trump administration, there is an opportunity to mobilize Venezuelans and for that they will need the support of the political leadership. What could be the service? I'll close with you before I go to commercial break, Mr. Carrasquero, Professor Carrasquero. Regarding this, Donald Trump's participation, let's talk about it on the international stage. For many it wasn't going to be something, an image that could be given. A peace agreement was signed, between Israel, never, hostages returned, prisoners returned. There are those who say, the next step will surely be in Latin America with the situation in Venezuela. What can I say? What can I say about this?
That sounds very acceptable, one would say, but we must always, and I want to insist on this, maintain the difference. The operation in the Caribbean is a police operation that aims at the doctrine or policy, whatever you want to call it, of America first. And Trump is very committed to that. In fact, he has appointed very important people to lead this operation. He is permanently monitoring the operation. He is the one who, according to him, authorizes the destruction of ships that are trafficking drugs in the Caribbean. So, obviously, Trump is a key person in this action that would not be happening under any other government, and I do not want to get into too much discussion about that, but the truth is that, having decided that he wants to combat drugs as an element that causes harm to American society and having classified the cartels as the standard bearers of drugs and saying that then he is going to fight the cartels directly. The element that I can use as an example most easily within this context, if I were Trump, is obviously a country that, like Venezuela, has lost its statehood. It is a country that has lost its institutionality, which is basically run by a cartel and that can serve as an example of how to first attack the drug cartels and second, how to re-institutionalize a country that was unfortunately lost to drug trafficking and such. Let's
go to a short commercial break. We'll come back to the situation in Venezuela right away. What could happen? What could be the breaking point within Maduro's regime that could perhaps herald a fracture in power? Is Nicolas Maduro nervous? We'll come back to these angles right away. We'll continue with the angle. Let's review the statements made by Nicolas Maduro, who once again attacked Maria Corina Machado after she was announced as the winner of the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize. Without mentioning her directly, he has instead launched some insults. He called her demonic after the award was granted by the Norwegian committee. The Maduro regime has also ordered the closure of its embassies in Oslo and Australia.
90% of the entire population repudiates the demonic witch of Sayona. We want peace. And we will have peace. But peace with freedom, with sovereignty. Not the peace of empires, the peace of the ruins of Gaza. Not the peace of misery and hunger, not the peace of death and blood, no. No, the peace of domination.
Ambassador Vieira, what do you feel when you hear this? We want peace and freedom, still. Nicolas Maduro and orders the closure of the embassy in Oslo. How do you see this step that Maduro is taking with respect to what he has made as a decision and the announcement of the Norwegian committee? Well, I wanted to say that Molière is reaching the top, right? Of the imposter, hypocritical position, combine also with an expression that denotes desperation, of fear, he decides to isolate himself more, he decides to adopt a narrative that, by the way, is increasingly distant from peace. In Venezuela, what they call the revolving door has been reactivated. Just yesterday, no less than 4 leaders were arrested in Lara, in Trujillo, and the countdown is still running. And by the way, Rut, let me tell you that all this also has a lot to do with Colombia, with Brazil. Those who portray them as Maduro's allies have to do with what has just happened in the Middle East. Look at the success, the impact that Trump's intervention in the Middle East has had. This peace agreement with Venezuela, which demonizes him, also invests Trump with an authority, both ethical and practical, as well as political, throughout the region, to score new victories for his foreign policy. I think the next one is Venezuela. And in that advance, notice that it should not surprise you that Colombia, where Petro himself is more inclined to Trump at the moment of the break than to Maduro himself. They are trying to manage a narrative of resistance or, let's say, demonize what is happening in the Caribbean Sea. But what is happening in the world right now is so powerful, with this absolute shift from palace diplomacy, which is a space for rhetoric, for bureaucratic desks, to diplomacy of coercive action and force, that this is producing, I repeat, some very interesting changes in the point of view of those who until yesterday were portrayed as allies of President Maduro or Mr. Maduro, because Mr. Maduro, no, forgive me for the slip.
I want to give you the idea.
China
is absolutely neutralized by what is happening in the Middle East. China is also no longer a sustainable ally of Venezuela, and I think Russia is going to be full. In this way, I am setting the table for this part of the debate because I find this progress that Trump has made with what happened in the Middle East interesting. I want to know what Jose Vicente Carrallero said. The opinion of Jose Vicente Carrallero with what Ambassador Vieira said. The role that these international figures play, some of whom are, others personal friends of Nicolas Maduro, in, what political survival would mean, or at the moment each one goes their own way. I cannot miss the opportunity to comment that what we heard from Maduro was the speech of a sociopath, of a psychopath, of a person totally disconnected from reality, who can transform his own personality as a murderer, drug trafficker, into others, of a person who applies state terrorism internally to persecute all internal people. And he talks about imperialism, but he forgets. Maduro must have not received a good enough education in Cuba, because when one speaks of imperialism, one speaks first of all about the bipolar world, the Soviet Union versus the United States, two empires. Empires with much more tradition than the North American Empire and the Chinese Empire that also exists, and the Persian Empire. They are empires, imperial traditions, and that's how they behave in international relations. So, Maduro lies shamelessly in at this moment with Trump as the protagonist of these coercive actions, as Ambassador Villarblanco said, using coercion as a lever of force, neither Russia nor China and much less Iran are very favorable to Venezuela. Who could be the allies? I'm not talking about Venezuela, or the Maduro regime. Who could be the allies of the Maduro regime? Well, parastatal or non-state organizations such as cartels, guerrillas, and irregular groups that operate on the border between Venezuela and Colombia. Those are elements of fear that will surely be intelligent enough not to measure up to the North American military force, which by the way today had some B-52s flying around the Caribbean, sending the message that there is no bunker where you can hide, that we cannot come looking for you. And this morning we learned of a plane carrying migrants from the United States that was not allowed to land, which means that Maduro wants to raise the stakes against Trump, and that could have a truly negative result for his permanence in Miraflores. I will close this section with Maria Isabel's view regarding what we are talking about, the allies. Ambassador Vieira Blanco was already saying a moment ago, what could happen? Colombia, we know what Petro has said so far, how he refers to Donald Trump, how he defends Maduro, the influence that groups have in Colombia, particularly those that have been associated with drug trafficking that would come out of Venezuela. Well, Petro doesn't have much moral authority or legitimacy to be there either, and it must also be clear that Maduro is a toxic character in the region, and many have chosen to distance themselves from him, especially at this juncture, because, for example, it is not convenient for Brazil at this time, for Lula in particular, to enter into an additional debate to the one he already has with this administration, especially because of the Bolsonaro issue and the tariffs. So Maduro is running out of support in the region. First, because he is an illegitimate president, he has neither moral authority nor electoral legitimacy. He is a de facto regime, and that makes it very difficult for his support in the region to be consistent. In Petro's case, that's why I say, he doesn't have much moral authority to be questioning other democracies or governments when he has to look at himself, right? What's happening in his own country and in his own administration or government. So, what Maduro has left are allies, as I said at the beginning, Russia, China, Turkey, Iran, North Korea, that is to say, it's a very select group of the most authoritarian regimes on the planet. That could help him with a Bashar al-Assad exit. And that's where I say that perhaps President Trump can help much more than we imagine, not only to avoid a direct military confrontation, but to convince Maduro to leave power and go to Turkey or go to Russia. In other words, I think there are possibilities in that sector. I see less in this case. For example, I don't see Petro facilitating Maduro's exit, not only because it would be inconceivable that he would go to Colombia, obviously, but let's say that he or Lula intervened to convince Maduro to leave power. I see it as much more difficult. The authoritarian axis could perhaps help, and more specifically Russia could help. A way out that I don't see at the moment, but if we talk about it from a more pragmatic point of view, that would be the most convenient thing, not only for Venezuelans. Maduro is going to think about his survival, literally, about getting out of all this alive.
Let's go to a short commercial break. We'll be right back with the conclusions after the break. Maximum pressure on Nicolas Maduro. We're talking here about the international offensive against the regime that has intensified. There are sanctions, there is diplomatic isolation, there are operations in the Caribbean that seek to weaken Maduro's power, while the opposition is insisting that his fall is only a matter of time. We are now on to the conclusions in the angle. I will listen in a minute and a half. Ambassador Vieira Blanco, I will start with you, then I will give the floor to Maria Isabel and I will finish with Jose Vicente. Go ahead, please. Well, I would like to underline a word that Maria Isabel mentioned, right? Which is Maduro's toxicity, a toxicity that makes him suffer from terminal isolation syndrome, an irreversible isolation, an isolation, let's say, that is the prelude to a real leap to another regime. This will be the subject of another program, of another analysis, but I think it is not an exaggeration to say that Maduro's days are numbered, the product of a toxicity that has undermined his credibility, that has absolutely taken away his confidence in his internal and external environment, that they see him as unsustainable, that makes China step aside, Russia turn a blind eye, Cuba watch and observe stealthily, as we were talking about just now, Colombia. I have no doubt that Colombia, even under Petro at his breaking point, will also agree to support a man who has been left absolutely, irreversibly, as I said, isolated. So, to conclude, I believe that we are facing a historic event in Latin America, I repeat, unprecedented, an event that also has the great historical challenge of preventing it from becoming a situation of anarchy and chaos. And in this, the message is also for the Venezuelan people. Let's not delegate or hand over all the work to Mr. Tromo, to external agents, or to Maria Corina internally. Very difficult situations are coming in terms of governance and governability to achieve the military's compliance and disobedience to that coalition, that dominant regime that has produced an obscurantism and repression so rarely seen on our continent. Syndrome of irreversible isolation, syndrome of terminal isolation.
Thank you, Maria Isabel. I hear you. I agree with the ambassador and I believe that one of the opportunities that is currently presented to the opposition is to reclaim that leadership and, of course, to lead that mobilization after the electoral fraud committed by the Maduro regime. Perhaps that and the repression and persecution did much to discourage Venezuelans from continuing to resist not only authoritarianism, but also the kind of sentence, right? To have to live under a regime of that nature. It It's also important to resume not only that process of mobilization, but to have the authority, the autonomy to be able to decide the direction, the orientation of this process to which we all aspire, which is the democratic transition. I will close with you, José Vicente Carrasquero.
Well, I want to end where I began. Maduro is prey to uncertainty. He does not know if those around him can be trusted. Those around him do not know if Maduro can be trusted. That creates significant tension that is difficult to manage, because basically what they are doing is trusting each other for survival, beyond staying in power and that kind of thing. And the most serious thing about this is that Maduro, as I have said on many occasions, does not belong to himself. Maduro cannot make decisions for himself because he is linked to very large forces, he is linked to cartels, he is linked to the power of Cuba, which prevents him from leaving power and that continues to generate significant pressure on him and those around him. Therefore, we cannot rule out the possibility that this coalition, this rotten leadership, as that gentleman would call it, could collapse at some point and we see it begin to fall apart in a significant way, and a precipitation of that kind would worry me in terms of public order, because then there would have to be a very rapid reaction from the opposition to try to restore order in a transition process that, without a doubt, could precipitate.
Thank you. Let's go to a short commercial break. We'll be right back. This is Angulo. We have reached the end of the angle. I would like to thank those who have participated today with their opinions, visions, and conclusions. Orlando Vieira Blanco, former ambassador of Venezuela to Canada, human rights lawyer. Thank you for being with us, Ambassador.
Thank you, Rut. Very kind. My gratitude also goes to Maria Isabel Puertas, an academic member of the Network of Political Scientists. Thank you for being with us, and I would also like to thank José Vicente Carrasquero, Professor of Political Science at Miami-Dade College. Thank you for being with us, Professor. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. I say goodbye. I am Rut Del Salto. Stay tuned to the international channel NTN 24.